Thomas Chokin.
It's good to be here.
Good to see you again. I know Thomas from from you attending a couple of my courses. I remember you were in my Heidegger course a few years ago, and also in the early Greek seminar, which took place in 2021. And I have since promised dozens of people to teach it again, and I have not been able to do it. But during that time, Thomas made a very good impression on me, given his knowledge of, especially, I would say, Aristotle, that came up very often, and also of other Greek philosophers at the time. So we stayed in touch, and about 1.5 years ago, I think it was November 2022, I was in Sicily to ask Goethe search for the original plant. No, that's not true, but at least I was there, and I we had a conversation on a phone call, and I asked you to put together a course, and you have done so. Course on Plato and beauty, but I had forgotten what you had initially planned for us. So maybe tell us the story.
Yeah, I know. So yeah, I mean, first of all, it is surreal to be able to work with you, right? And what happened was, I remember us talking. You came to me and asked me, "Hey, Thomas, would you like to do a course?" And I was like, "Of course, I would love to. I'm very honored." Um, and I remember when I first gave it to you, because I come from a design background, one of the areas I just had a personal interest in is on beauty. So I gave you this monster Notion document using Tolstoy's "What is Art" essay as a launch point to then go all the way back, give all the line of development of thought of beauty and the beautiful from Tolstoy all the way to Plato. You looked at that, and then 1 minute you were like, "No, that's too much. I need you to go back. We need to narrow this down." As you said off the record, I would be still writing that thing until 2032, probably, if I was trying to achieve that project. Um, and like you said, I originally my study in philosophy was Aristotle originally, but I found just going in first when all right, I'm going to go back to Plato and then see what I want to work with that. I found that Plato's account of beauty was so rigorous and so enveloped in everything and all and so many of the dialogues. I thought that would be just a great place just to focus on that. So I came back to you and I said, okay, we're going to go from all this history of beauty and beautiful to just Plato. And I even had difficulty narrowing down the 6 dialogues. I could have easily done more. There are lots of other dialogues we could also refer to, uh, but I narrowed it down and to the 6. And and definitely, actually, one of the reasons why I thought this discussion of Plato and the beautiful was so powerful was was the greater Hippias. It's so funny because I trained at Parsons School of Design in
Yeah.
design, and we got exposed to the Republic. That was the typical Platonic dialogue that you get exposed to. But it's so ironic that in the arts we don't get presented with greater Hippias, which is an explicit account of the beautiful, given you right there to get started. And it's
Yeah.
such a when you see this scholarship about it, it's this great foundation of a kind of starting point of thinking. Um, I thought
Yeah.
that was just a great place to get started, and it took about all this time to develop the course. But I'm very happy with the results, and I'm very excited to have this available now to talk about it.
Yeah. So Creator Hippias is also the first dialogue that you'll be reading with students. I just want to add that when you sent me the Notion document, I still don't know what it is. I have no notion of what it is, and I couldn't open it, of course. So but I think I figured it out at some point. I still have issues sometimes with the Google Docs. I don't know how to open them very often. But we've been able to download everything that you've contributed and uploaded everything, etc. And if you have any questions for Thomas on Plato and the beautiful and virtue and how all this hangs together, please just uh, ask your question, and we'll get to them either when they fit or at the end. And you can, or you may, however, also download the syllabus for the course. The link to that is in the chat, but also in just below this live stream. Um, and the good thing is, of course, running an independent academy that has not even fixed term dates or anything of that sort, which is also, I'll never establish that. I told someone yesterday. I had a private seminar at a pub, at a back room at a pub in Fitzrovia in London, and with a couple of about, I don't know, 8 or so students from the LSE on Heidegger. So off the record meeting, just just to discuss Heidegger completely, just for the sake of it, the question concerning technology. And one of the things I noticed again in all this discussion, because we also went into education and the state of education, is that if I ever started establishing this is when courses have to run in winter, this is when they have to run in spring, etc., then it adds too much nonsense, too much noise, and some courses take time to develop. I would say all courses take time to develop, especially when it comes to Plato. You need to read the dialogues first, and I can tell you that Thomas has put great effort into this, and we will be focusing on specific sections, but Thomas has also made sure that you can actually, read very broadly as well. So we can get into all of that later on, perhaps. So feel free to just give us a general introduction, perhaps, into the course, your understanding of beauty in Plato, and the specific dialogues you'll be reading.
Yes. So, like I said, the when you get your first impression of Plato, if you generally have only encountered Plato from the Republic, there's that great line about the image makers basically being cast away, right, from the imitative arts from the state. But when you read these dialogues and you sense that the beautiful is constantly appearing and kind of sitting always in relationship with Plato and all his ideas and thinking. So even on things of epistemology, on the laws, on ethics, and or moral and virtue and how we should live our lives, you sense that the beautiful is sitting here in all these different categories. So it's certainly not the impression you get from reading these dialogues. You're realizing that this is not the normal kind of modern approach of a personal preference. That beauty is just a personal preference, subjectivity in the eye of the beholder, that kind of language. But something that's much more systematic
Yeah,
to
yeah,
his entire project. That'd be my understanding of reading from Plato's work. Um, so the dialogues in this in particular that I selected from, I just brought it up before. We start with Greater Hippias because it is
yeah,
an explicit discussion of the beautiful.
yeah,
But the other ones, for example, Symposium. So the relationship of love is in this relationship to the beautiful is a very deep topic. So we have two dialogues on that idea. We also within, for example, so in Symposium we have love discussed, but also Phaedrus. But then there's also very interesting issues of predication within there and in Divine Madness and its relationship to the beautiful, for example, from there. Building up from there, we then go to Meno to understand both for what is virtue, but also we see an application of epistemology happening there and geometry. Then from there, we go into the nature of images, which obviously in the arts is a big question. It's a live question because there's this question of what is the relationship of images to reality. There was a quote in that in Diotima's speech in the Science of the Beautiful in Symposium. We see that, and then we also see this in Critias with images and names and what are their relationship to truth and to reality. And then we're going to close with an understanding of Platonic forms, which was initiated in Greater Hippias. There's a whole line here: by the good, things are good, and by the just, things are just.
yeah,
We see in Parmenides the conclusion of what are the forms according to Plato, and the beautiful is a topic that is explicitly discussed by Parmenides in his discussion with the younger Socrates in that dialogue. So through an understanding of beauty, we see that it has very deep ontological epistemology, ethical and law applications, uh, and especially on the human soul, and especially in that relationship to the human soul.
yeah. It's excellent. That's excellent, and it's really important that you end on the Parmenides, because one aspect, not just an aspect, one fundamental question that you address throughout is the question for forms, what the forms are, the so-called forms as we translate them, or the ideas in Plato. And it the Republic, the Politeia, is more or less an educational work. One could say it raises the issue, but you cannot stop there really. And it's, I think, really in the Parmenides where the so-called forms, the idei, are brought forth fully. Now, perhaps let's just say here's a initial question. Here's a bit of praise. Thanks, Johannes and Thomas, for doing these presentations. They are all incredibly rewarding.
I
Well,
appreciate
we
it.
hope. Thank you. We hope to see you at the course, also, Simon. And here's a question, maybe for you, Professor. That's you, Thomas. Are you more Platonist or Aristotelian? Well, you are a lecturer. Maybe you should mention this also, what you
Yes.
actually do for a living.
Yeah. So part of the thing, so I am an educator. So I'm a lecturer at the University of North Georgia. But I've also taught as a visiting lecturer and professor at Pratt Institute, Passion Institute of Technology, um, Queens College of the City University of New York, City College of New York at the City College of New York, all these acronyms. Um, I've taught basically at basically the major design schools in New York City. I'm an alumnus at Parsons School of Design and the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Art and Science. So I've been educating and lecturing on design and the arts for about 10 years at this point. When I'm not lecturing or working in educational environments, I also am an independent designer. So my work has been done for Coca-Cola, Starbucks, Foot Locker Express, and Google. Specifically, my expertise in design is in typography and type design. So I've done
Yeah.
fonts that are open source available, and then my specialty within that is fonts that improve literacy and performance for people with dyslexia and other reading conditions. So anyway, so the point is I do a lot of work in design and I lecture about it and teach a lot. So just to circle back with this question about a Platonist or Aristotelian, I have to say my first love is Aristotle. I mean, that was my
Yeah.
foundation when I started reading
Yeah.
philosophy and training in it. That was my first love. Um, I have been much more sympathetic to Plato after reading these dialogues. And I would say actually also my readings have been with Al-Ghazali in the Islamic tradition, as well as Thomas Aquinas. I find generally these kind of harmonizations or attempts to do so. I see Aquinas as trying to harmonize between the two schools of
Yeah.
accounts. I'm very sympathetic to that. So the short answer is I probably say, and I do quote a lot from Aristotle to help flesh out what Plato is getting at in these dialogues. So I probably will say I'm more Aristotelian, I would say, because I do use those
Mm.
accounts to help adjust for things in the lecture series. But I am very sympathetic to Plato's presentation as we see in these dialogues.
Yeah. I'm just sharing uh, our conversation on Aristotle and Heidegger in the chat if anyone's interested. That's from a few years ago.
That was a good one.
Yeah, and when it comes to Plato and Platonism, I always it's it seems to me that, so in general, hardcore Platonists are very critical of Aristotle. Aristotelians are not critical of Plato and Platonists, and I sometimes wonder if Occidental philosophy, European philosophy, hasn't missed out on the opportunity to realize that Aristotle continues the Platonic project, the
Yes.
project of his teacher, and that you cannot stop with Plato. And especially because Plato in the Parmenides says, and I have to paraphrase now, um, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could show that the forms are changeable, etc., if they can be rearranged, etc. So this is a bit of a paraphrase. It's not coming as I would hope it's coming, but in any event, I think that Aristotle does continue the Platonic project rather than um, do something completely uh, different. And so that's an aside. That's something perhaps we could discuss. One question that people often have is, because this is a summer school, we can now say that the seminars will begin on the 27th of July, which is a Saturday, and we're meeting 5 times. Will also there will be so the readings will be quite short. If you don't have much time, it will be enough to discuss the questions. You can listen to Thomas's lectures that will help you guide you through these texts, and they are basically ordered by by topic. So um, the remind me again. Um, Symposium and Phaedrus are together because eros and love play an important role in both, for example. The Parmenides is on its own because it
Yes, it
is
is.
the Parmenides. We we had to discuss that one. I remember. No, no, it has to be on its own. Thomas, can't do it to them. Too much. But so the it is difficult because it is Plato. But what do you think should be the should there are there any prerequisites that you would set as an experienced lecturer, etc.? Because I always say there are none,
Yeah.
and I'm always surprised by who shows up and how people, what they come up with, especially when they come to it totally originally. But you might see this differently.
I don't. I don't generally. I think the only caveat I would say is probably I think there's a lot of rhetoric to make the assumption that we are the Greeks, like we are exactly in conjunction with them. But in my readings, I found that generally holding more of a position that they are seeing things very differently than us. There's a there's a gap that if you come with that awareness of it, you gain a lot more value from what is being said in these dialogues. The language is generally with the I agree. Parmenides is such an intense essay. That dialogue is quite the ride. But generally, almost all the other dialogues, they're pretty straightforward, especially in their English translations. There's nothing necessarily
Yeah,
that technically demanding, I would
yeah,
say.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I think it's more about coming with an open mind. And like I said, definitely I think the key of a good thinker in philosophy is to seek first to understand what is being said and not to presume that it's exactly in agreement with what our presumptions are going in. I'm going to give one example. Um, I gave a lecture once. I did a reading group for a symposium, and one of the students, bless her heart, uh, when this discussion of affection came up, she
yeah,
thought that meant like loving affection.
yeah, yeah,
Just a very simple point. This is just a nice thing. I just had to clarify. I was
yeah,
like, no, no, that's not like I get that's understandable. Uh, but when we mean by affection, we mean uh, acted upon. Like that was the context
yeah, yeah.
uh, of that. But in general, as long as you come with an open mind, I think it is a very rewarding experience to seek first to understand what these thinkers were thinking, and that more importantly, that they have a lot to say that we may have misunderstood, or they have a
Yeah.
very different context that is very rewarding if we seek to understand it.
Here's another good question by Ben Thomas. And by the way, people don't so keep asking questions, and also don't forget to download the syllabus. How do Plato's aesthetics intersect with his politics? I'm going blind. What kind of what's the slash doing here? What kind of are there continuities between beauty and the Republic?
I think there's a bunch. I think there's a bunch of points on that. So, okay, let's start with the
Yeah,
first one. Well, the first thing is you see a lot that, for example, in Greater Hippias, there's basically a demand that the beautiful has to apply to the laws. The laws
yeah,
have to apply to this. You don't get to just
yeah.
separate it out. There's a demand that it all has to come together. Objects, things, ideas, laws, customs. All these must be in the discussion of the beautiful. There's that
Mm,
point. So we already see right there, Plato's saying there is a connection right there. Second part, in Phaedrus, of the hierarchy of the gods and the
mm,
relationship of the persons to their beloved, that the philosopher with the highest rank is also with an artist. It's at the lower rank. I believe it's rank 7 or 6, where the imitative artist, craftsman, is at. So there's an artist that seems to be of equal standing as the philosopher in that discussion in Phaedrus, for example. And also in mine, let me double check. I think it's in Is it Phaedrus or is it Meno? It's Meno. The
yeah.
discussion of the right opinion of the lawmakers coming from divine intervention. So and then making beautiful laws.
Mm,
That comes from Meno, for example. So these are points I would draw out to see that for Plato, the beautiful and the laws in particular have a really deep relationship with each other. Just riffing on those points.
Yeah,
And more
great.
importantly, that the cat, what I initiated at the beginning, pointing out the imitative artist being dismissed, is not the totality of the artist. For example, the discussion of the signs of the beautiful from Diotima in Symposium, as well as that hierarchical relationship of the of a kind of artist with the philosopher in Phaedrus and its relationship to divine madness of the fourth kind.
Go on.
Yeah, so that relates to mania. So mania is pointed out to be presented as four modes. There is obviously the kind of physical mania, madness, illness, mental illness, but and there's some really fun ones about basically rational divination that's involved in that. I have a little tangent note about that's basically AI happening. Um, but the
Say it
building point
again.
of the end was that there is a kind of divine madness, mania of a divine inspiration that
Yeah.
strikes through to the person, the recollection of the beautiful.
Hmm.
So I find so this person is able to then beget basically beautiful things because of the recollection of the beautiful. Um, so just that's the riff on that point.
What we I didn't make that out because it was too quick. What did you say on AI?
Oh yeah, so yeah, there's a discussion of what's called rational divination. So the image by using divination from signs. So I write about this. Uh, there's also a note in Aristotle about that as well. They don't really they make very quick comments about it, but the idea of using signs for divination, predictions of the future, prophecy. Uh, I do an aside about that, where basically through AI, basically operating through probabilistic presentation of simulation of similarity, that this is and because it's not it's kind of considered not it's not knowledge. It's almost one can argue a kind of divine an inspirational divine operation almost in that way.
Well, that's debatable.
Right.
Um, or it's just the Platonic cave on steroids.
Yes.
Um, so cut off from the good. Is mania hysteria on this point?
No, it's translated. It's mania. I'm not sure about hysteria. That's not a different translation.
Yeah. Here's another one. Historian Tom Holland has done some great work emphasizing how different we are from the Greeks and Romans and how important it is to take that into account when reading and studying them.
Yeah.
So that's a comment. What do you say?
No, I'm as basically reinforce. Yeah, I think generally it's a healthy position. Um, there are things that are going to be you're going to find similarity to. I wouldn't deny that, but in terms of a kind of uh, just because some things are similar or have kind of vague similarity to what we understand, doesn't mean we should write it off as if that's not worth our
Yeah.
investigation.
Yeah, I have to say about Tom Holland, he writes many books very quickly. One of those overproductive writers. And this is such a throwaway remark, to be honest. If that's the case, then he's Christian. Well, then what do we have in common with the time of Christ? Nothing whatsoever. Even less, I would say, than with Rome and Greece. I would also say that this is not the point whether there are similarities or differences. It's rather the point as uh, is how to build a bridge to the classics or to the ancients, because they do stand there, especially the Greeks, as the first non-barbaric people, uh, as a exemplar of what it means to become human. So and this is never just a given. You also cannot just start reading. You have to build a bridge towards it, towards them, and towards their ideas. And that we are different or similar is just an typical empiricist remark. But then Tom Holland would have to take all of this into account and also question his Christianity, I would say. So here's Aaron. What do you make of Nietzsche's criticism of Plato and of his equation of virtue with goodness? And that unauthored of beauty with truth and goodness, etc. A complete straw man, or is there something to it?
Okay, there's something really interesting. So in Greater Hippias, it's a big question how the biggest question with any Platonic dialogue is how many times what is being presented should we take it at face value versus it's part of either ironic position or part of a larger commentary. I only bring this up because in Greater Hippias, there's a line about the relationship of goodness to beauty, and this is actually a point of argumentation made by the character Socrates to Hippias about beauty being the begetter of the good, and thus the father of the good, and
Mm-hmm.
thus there's a kind of clear. So instead of being equivalent, they're actually that'd be an argumentation to show that they're not the same, and in fact, beauty has a superior position to the good,
Mm-hmm.
which seems completely in contradiction or in tension with basically the hierarchy of either co-equal relationship of beauty and goodness, or the superiority of goodness over beauty. Um, so I think that's actually part of the reason why I'm not a Nietzschean scholar, so I can't give much commentary about that. But in terms of just drawing out this relationship of beauty and goodness, this is like right off the bat in Greater Hippies, a really fascinating contention, um, worth investigation and discussion. When I did an in-person salon about Greater Hippias, there was a person of a scholarship at Plato who was kind of, I anticipate, kind of rocked by that line because it just seems so unexpected Plato would present that argument um, in a dialogue presentation like that, just on that one point alone.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a good question here. By the way, so what we're witnessing now is quite similar to what the seminars will be like, just that you will obviously be in a Zoom room together with Thomas, and you can ask these questions and discuss them with Thomas, but also with others. What we usually do is we have breakout sessions. That means you'll split up into smaller groups for about 10 minutes each, where you discuss a certain section that you've read, and then you come back to the bigger group. You've listened to Thomas's lecture, you've done the reading, you come in, you and we meet for 2 hours for 5 weeks. And by the way, at the final session, you get to present your own work. So the difference will be that you won't have to type your questions. You can ask your questions directly, and there are already a lot of good questions coming here. So this is Ben again. I thought Plato dismisses art as decadent. Didn't he like the poets in the Republic? How do we reconcile this with his well, I wouldn't say it's aesthetics, but okay.
Yeah,
Go on. Aesthetics is an invention by Baumgarten. It's a German
there it
man.
is. Yes, it's not the cologne. So the cologne is the beautiful. So it gets you reference a lot. And anytime we see the beautiful in these dialogues, it's not aesthetic. It's the cologne or some variation of that. Um,
Yeah.
so that's just the first point on that. But in the second part, yeah. So Ben, as I said, there is a great mystery here. It's definitely there's some because the issue is an issue of imitation. That's the
Yeah.
tension
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
right? Which
Well,
is why Critias is going to be one of the dialogues. What's that?
that would refute your remark on AI then.
Well, that's the point. We said before you were like I said I was playing with it being divine, but it's not. It's actually it's yes,
Ah,
it's an
okay.
image.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yes,
did. Yeah. I'm bad. I'm hard of hearing. I'm getting old here.
as am
This is-
I. I know. As we said off the record, I'm getting the white hair now. The mark of wisdom.
Okay. Don't
But
tell
yes,
them
the build.
everything we said off the record, or we get kicked off YouTube or something. Now go on.
I know it's fine. It's fine. So Ben, to answer your point, uh, this is actually really key. Why the issue of the images is so essential because that is
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
issue at
Yeah.
here, issue at hand here.
Mm.
And Plato he has very nuanced issues about this. They brought it back to Meno on the question of where the fact that right opinion gets you the same result as knowledge, and the discussion of where do the statesmen get their divine inspiration to create the laws.
Yeah.
These are tensions to be resolved. Um, but that's my point. So like thinking what we know about the Republic and how that portrays a certain idea, it's
Hmm.
drawing out the need to understand how imitation works. mimesis, uh,
Yeah.
and likeness when it comes in, from Critias, which we discuss in Dialogue 5.
So read, when you read book 10 again in the Republic, for example, book 5 also, it's mimesis or imitation is exactly as it is crucial. But we also have to keep in mind that, again, this is a work, a text that concerns for the most part how to educate the populace and for whom which texts should be available. I know to us, um, this is not how we would think of it because we have everything at our fingertips and we would consider it censorship if it weren't, and rightly so, of course. But what Plato is on about is he asks, should everything be made available to everyone? Especially, should it be made available from young age? Because children learn from by imitation. And it's very often these sections that are then pulled out and pulled very often also taken out of context. They're actually concerning raising very young children. And when it comes to Homer, there is uh, he he scolds Homer for beginning to speak in the voice of his characters. But what he should rather do is to remain neutral, not to imitate, as the poet, not to imitate the rhapsode, not to imitate the voices of some of the characters in the Iliad, for example. So he begins to speak in the voice of a priest. And there's actually, it's not coming to me now, but in book 7, after the cave, Plato reappropriates that section and that passage, but now has changed the voice so that there's no longer an imitation of the voice. So he does come back to that passage. So it's not just an outright banning of the poets. Plato quotes the poets all the time. He quotes
Yeah.
Homer. He doesn't just outright ban Homer, outright ban Pindar. Quite the opposite, I would say. But so we have to look at the context of the Republic specifically, and then also have to think about the danger that comes with imitation and with the image itself, or with the shadows, with doxa, as all the aspects that Thomas has pointed out for us, and also in this, so aesthetics is modern. To consider art in terms of aesthetics is so it's an invention by Alexander Baumgarten, German philosopher. That word is from his uh, his writings, as far as I know, maybe from Wolf as well, and then by popularized basically by Kant. And in Kant, aesthetics for the in the beginning means uh, well, it has to do with the forms of intuition with time and space, so with sense perception. Aesthesis is sense perception for the Greeks, but beauty for the Greeks, as you will learn at the course, is genuinely ontological and then also ethical, because you cannot separate the ontological from the ethical, etc. In Plato. So great questions. If you want to add anything, Thomas, then I shall shut up.
I mean, the very fact that we get such great questions is just, it makes me so happy to teach this class, right? Because it's such a wellspring of insight and just thinking. Uh, I love it. It's fantastic.
This is the best way to spend your summer. So people download the syllabus now, and if you're ready to enroll, this is a soft opening. You may do so now. The link to enroll is also in the description of this video. Um, there's no need to do this now. There's enough time. Just have a look over whether you have actually time. Just to mention this now, first meeting is July 27th, and we're always meeting from 6 to 8 p.m. UK time, which is 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for those of you in the US. And it's always an international classroom. So you'll be meeting people from Europe, Northern America, also from Mexico. So Natio always shows up, Mexico City. You may remember him from the um, early Greek and also Heidegger seminar.
Yeah.
So this was a great question. Yes, so many great questions here. Here's
That's what I'm
Harris.
saying. I'm so excited for this class because if the quality of the
Yeah,
questions from this group is so
it's
good, can you imagine
incredible.
the
Yeah,
pro seminar?
yeah. This is like what's this is why all this talk about the dead internet theory and blah blah everything taken over by bots, etc. Yeah, to some degree perhaps, but really what's alive in it, and there's always this strange attraction, because I never know. I've done this. I've been doing this now for 5 years. I never know who shows up in my courses. I sometimes I know the people. Sometimes I have no idea who they are, and for the most part, it goes extremely well. So it's still also possible to have a civil discussion in a group of 10, 20, 30 people. That's also still possible, which is wonderful. So okay, here's Aaron again. Does beauty, I haven't read the question yet, does beauty today need rescuing? And if so, who is to blame? Oh, the blame game again. Plato himself or Aristotle, Hume, Burke, Kant, Freud. Well, Freud in my book, but just
Yeah.
for the lols. Kidding.
Yes. Um, well, it's kind of like just what Johannes brought it up, like the idea of like this is why names are so important. By the very fact we use aesthetic as a kind of demarcation of beauty, we've cut ourselves off from what that term really means, like what beauty really means. So, in terms of rescuing, I think the very act of taking this course to come to understand that the cologne is what we mean by the beautiful, not the aesthetic not just the aesthetic, it's like sense perception. Um, that's, I think, a rescue within itself. Because that's the point. It's like there's a kind of striking of truth.
Yeah,
It's so ironic. Isn't it ironic that aesthetic is this kind of sensational pleasure? I mean, the line I always point to is just like reference to Gorgias, right?
yeah,
Of flattery, right? Of sensational flattering of a cooking. It's a knack, kind of
yeah,
that derogatory language of the artist. When the artist is really, as you said, Johannes, right? Plato and many philosophers point to art many times to be the paradigm exemplar of off of the overflowing of truth. It's almost like a work of art when it's truly a work of art has an overflow of reality to it that
yeah,
the philosopher then has to then be a disciple of to then translate to bring to understanding.
yeah, yeah. Uh, with with Kant, it's a strange. We've just gone through 10 weeks of Kant and finished on the third critique. For Kant, it's the sublime, which is an aesthetic relationship, an aesthetic reflection that the subject has with itself, not anything outside, not actually the stormy ocean, but it is the relationship with oneself. So this is what is in German referred to as Reflexionsphilosophie. With Kant, even though he always tries to get back out and find nature itself somehow, um, there is with this beginning of Reflexionsphilosophie, a great philosophy of reflection, perhaps, an overemphasis on subjective self-referentiality and how the subject relates to itself. This is what aesthetisch, um, aesthetical will mean for Kant in the third critique. So it's not, of course, not subjective in the sense of personal. It's still a logical subject, but it translates into the personal subject. So it becomes, or with Hume, it becomes beauty becomes a matter of taste, even though there's a standard of taste. Um, so I wouldn't say it's not necessarily about finding who's to blame. It's the movement of modernity itself.
Yeah.
Subjectivity, Cartesian subjectivity is often referred to. That is not to blame, but that is one of the main trajectories of modernity. Uh, but what, as Thomas keeps saying, as you keep saying, to remind us that there's another way of thinking of beauty could also then give rise to another self understanding of how we are in the world, because it is ultimately beauty together with eros, etc., of course, that lets us see the forms which we could also, it's not somewhere up there in the heavens, but lets us see the good in the world. um, okay, is as John Vervaeke proposed, and we can now say that Thomas will be speaking with John Vervaeke in a couple of weeks also on this topic, is as John proposes virtue the beauty of wisdom.
I'm very excited. I'm very excited for that discussion with Rafiki, and I'm very much looking forward to that. Um, So the reason why this course has it's both beauty and virtue is that virtue has a very clear role to play uh, in the relationship of beauty and the human soul, especially. So there's actually a whole point reason why I brought Mino into the equation of the discussion for the course
Yeah,
is because its topic is what is virtue, and
yeah, yeah.
wisdom is directly pointed out as the investigation within that dialogue. So the short answer is come to the course. I don't want to spoil the answers from that development, but I think
Don't
it's very poignant that this is being brought up. I think it's very poignant.
don't spoil it. Yes, let's arete is the word for virtue. And when I had ancient Greek at school, we were not allowed to translate the word arete. Our teacher used to say it's untranslatable, but
Yes.
so many words are untranslatable. Arete also has the prefix alpha rho uh, is a prefix of coming together, of joining together. So there is a joining together, and there's. I will teach the Nicomachean Ethics at the end of this year. So and I try to, I always make it too difficult for myself. I try to find this new translation for it, and let's see if it works. But it is a joining together. So it's rather than all these different virtues, it's arete itself is the coming together, which you can see the character formation coming out of it as well. So this is oh,
Well, by the way,
go on.
Hans,
Yeah,
just
sorry.
I want to build on that point because I do believe so. Arete, virtue. It's when we talk about terms that we've lost that we need to return to come back to recover again. 100%. Uh, Virtue is definitely one of those terms or concepts. Ah, is that arc? Is that arc? This is great. I love this. This is fantastic. This is such a great conversation. Anyway, sorry. I just want to share that recovery of both beauty and virtue, yeah, like
Yeah,
again, coming together, overflow or kind of actuality, right? So that kind of I think of this is my Aristotelianism coming in because I think about things like excellence in the
yeah,
sense of actualization
yeah,
of a
yeah,
right? So these are all deeply
yeah,
bound and connected together, and especially the idea of the moral virtues, right? To shape one's soul to be able to understand, to know in the
yeah,
first place. Yes,
yeah. To know, and also to bridge the theoretical and the practical.
exactly. Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. There you go.
Sorry, I just get
Aristotle.
excited talking about this stuff. I love it.
um, Here is something big. Harris, thank you very much for the super chat of 100 euros. Thank you so much, Harris. This is Harris is still the first and only one who's giving super chats during my live streams, but this is the most generous one so far. So thank you very much. This will help
Godspeed.
us keep the lights on. Uh, Harris asks, isn't the very structure of Plato's dialogues beautiful by itself?
That's a great
Harris,
point.
I mean, Harris is Greek. I mean, he has to be in this course. I mean, so
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah. I would say, especially this idea when you treat these dialogues in relationship to each other, like together, that kind of gathering together point that Johannes has brought up. I feel that way. I think these dialogues are very beautiful when you come to see their structure and their form and their kind of interconnected relationships and the kind of revelation that can come from that kind of understanding. So I'm very sympathetic to agree with that statement, very much so, personally.
I think that's yes, and when you think about that, he doesn't he refer even to dialectics as beautiful somewhere, and so y- the
Well, there's Parmenides. So there is that point in Parmenides where
yeah,
basically it's being spoken that the young Socrates needs to be developed, and he'll be very beautiful when he develops it in his dialectic process.
yeah,
I do recall that.
yeah, I think it's also in the Republic somewhere, and but this also leads to further questions that we could then pursue, not now, but at the course, and then also maybe for some people's presentation, etc. Is, for example, um, is is the movement of language what a text is in the first place? For example, how it is that a text can disclose as with thinking through and with the text, the beautiful, which isn't the aesthetically pleasing, but is the ontologically uh, enlightening, opening up to the idea of the good, etc. Um, so here's a question that I don't know who, frankly, who Pierre Grimes is, but antinomies are at the heart of many, according to the late Pierre Grimes. Is this an idiosyncratic reading? Are you aware of this reading? I'm not.
I'm not really that scholar.
Yeah, well,
I mean, one of the things that we do, I mean, the Parmenides we use the beautiful as a way to discuss, right? The idea that how it's articulated, what the forms are as its main
yeah,
purpose. There is a second part of that dialogue, which is the process of the hypothetical investigation, and I do discuss it. In light of understanding what forms are. Um, right, there's a presentation of being is one, and then you work through what are the implications of that. So, and actually, the most important part of that, I talk about this related to Critilis. It's actually very, because you brought up this point before, Johannes, about the theoretical to the experience, to the practical, to the experience. Um, the idea that acting and acting upon are part of reality.
yeah,
That's actually an incredibly important doctrine or point being made up. If we didn't have that, then we have the power of perception to connect us to reality would be almost broken. At least that'd be my way of arguing about that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so I find that the second act of Parmenides, where there is this kind of investigation of hypothetical implications. It's stated you got to look for what's the consequences of the hypothesis and its affirmation and denial, both within itself and being acted upon, and how it act upon others. I find that in very much like a justification for the the almost I don't want to say the aesthetic experience, but the training in the arts, because the training of the arts is a line from there's a constant discussion. What is genius? For example, in
yeah,
Aristotle, the idea of the poetics and rhetoric. Um, it's the eye of resemblance, to be able to see resemblances in things. That's the mark of a genius that cannot be taught. Um, and that the bringing before the eyes is the act of metaphor and analogy to bring an understanding, a striking through. So it's through, but it's through contraries that that's operated through and done. Anyways, I'm just riffing on this point, just
yeah.
on.
No, I'm not sure that antinomies is even the right term, to be honest. I'm not familiar with this gentleman. I've never read anything by him, but an antinomy is an unresolvable contradiction, and antinomy is then take so or is taken as antinomious, so would perhaps have Christian undertones, but in general in philosophy it would have to do with Kant, and Kant in the Transcendental Dialectic speaks of the antinomies of reason, of pure reason, when reason is applied or applies itself to experience. But to a dialectician such as Plato, antinomies do not, in that sense, um, in this sense, arise in maybe they so or they don't arise as unresolvable in terms, because as Plato allows for dialectics to play out, to put it simply, he doesn't have to resort to uh, a transcendental solution as Kant. So I wouldn't probably even think that antinomies is the correct word. It's rather um, thinking through dialectically uh, the what it is that shows itself. But for Plato, what remains true, or is even not even questioned, is the Parmenidean paradigm or dictum that thinking and being are unified. There's a unity, or are the same, to auto, to quote from the poem by Parmenides himself. So, and this, by the way, also is a modern experience. This falling out of the world, that the unity of thinking and being now is either denied or has to be specifically thought and established somehow. That is not questioned by the ancients. So, let us know if you have more questions for Thomas. I think we've now responded to all of them as far as I can tell. If you want, please download the syllabus. The link to do so is in the chat, but also below the video here. Give us your first name and your email address. You click download, and it opens a Google Drive file. So you may download it from there, and then you'll receive an email when we open enrollment officially. If you want to join the course now, you also can do so now. Maybe I'll show you what it looks like on the inside. 1 second. No, here. There we go. There it is. Thomas Chocken.
Yes.
There we So here's the introduction. So this is what it looks like
So,
on the
welcome
inside.
to this introduction.
You've
Here's
got
me.
the video. Yes, it's always annoying to see oneself, I know. The
So,
introduction
welcome.
lecture. This is the PDF of the lecture, which you can download. And here we move on to the Greater Hippias, and then move on to the Symposium, the Phaedrus. So it's all uploaded. If you want to enroll now, feel free to do so. So you can start reading. We've actually got here, for example, in the course overview section, a
So,
PDF.
welcome
Also,
to this introduction. It's the
apologies.
autoplay that really kills it.
Yeah. I always forget that it does that. So you can, if you actually enroll now, when there's enough time. There's 5 weeks in this course, but if you do now, then you can see the reading sections here. So the specific sections and the more general cited sections, etc. All these dialogues are publicly available on Tufts, for example. PDFs are abundant. And I would also, though, recommend to start building your own library. As you can see, this is Aristotle, a lot of Aristotle. Loeb, this is the English. But here is Platon, as we say in German, Plato, collected works, all dialogues in Greek and in German translation. It's unfortunate that there isn't one. You can't buy all the collected works by Aristotle just in one and get it a bit cheaper. That would be good. But I keep collecting as much as I can. So I think so. Yeah, download the syllabus, and if you're ready, enroll, and we'll make you aware via email as well. Here is another question. Well, thank you, Mills, also for your time. Again, thank you, Harris. Thank you very much. And thank you, Simon. Here is Douglas Coliada. What really blew my mind was the diagram presented in Meno resembled Aristotle's square of opposition, which brought up Empedocles' transition of elements. Would you like to comment on that one?
No, that diagram and demonstration of geometry, I think, is very powerful on 2 parts. Part 1 is actually I use as a segue to go talk about the names, because if you notice, the way this is completed is through the introduction of the diagonal. That term has to be used, and specifically the Y's call it the diagonal. So the slave boy goes through this experiential discovery. I think it's really powerful. The point that the geometry is kind of experiential knowledge is a very fascinating demonstration. But with the introduction of names as well to work through and complete the understanding. I think that's for me the main value of that diagram demonstration. But it does have an interesting correspondence, or a kind of interesting kind of resemblance to the square of opposition. It's obviously not working the same way, right, in terms of using universals, particulars, et cetera, but in terms of its construction, right, the idea of geometry and knowledge and construction via geometry, I think is an interesting idea. I think that's certainly fascinating to talk about.
Excellent. So thank you all very much for these questions. We've taken now enough of Thomas's time. Anything in closing, Thomas, before we disappear into the night?
To the ether of the internet. Well, I mean, obviously, yeah, it is what it is. So obviously, first of all, everyone live who's asked these great questions, it made me really, I mean, I'm very thankful first for Johannes for giving this opportunity to teach the class. Second, for these great questions. I think people participating and understanding the beautiful is probably one of the best things we can do with our time. I think this
Yeah.
idea of restoring our understanding for ourselves and seeing not just our understanding the world better, but maybe even to shape our own souls and how we want to see, how we want to act in the world in a better way through spending time together with Plato. I couldn't ask for a better use of my time, and it's a real privilege to make the class and to be with everybody, hopefully, in a couple of weeks on July 27th.
Exactly. So here Simon says more, 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 to which I say, sign up, sign up, sign up, and there
Come to
will
the
be more.
course.
Yeah, come to the course. Yeah. So thank you very much for these closing remarks. Those were excellent. This is exactly what philosophy should give us, as philosophy is also to be understood here in your course as an art of living and living well and reaching eudaimonia, to stay again with Aristoteles. So, okay, I don't know. I can't read. This is too long. So join us, download the syllabus, make up your mind. The link to enroll is also in the description of this video. Share this video with anyone you know who's interested in philosophy, Plato more broadly, beauty, aesthetics as well, if you want to call it aesthetics. If you don't have time for the seminars, just join the self-study tier. But we will be discussing this again some other time. So thank you all very much. I shall retire. I say good night because it's evening here, but where you are, it's good afternoon, I guess, or whatever.
Yes.
Okay.